Well, thank you, Lynn, again for inviting us to the information session. It is our pleasure, to spread the word of UFile to any place we can do. Honestly, at 5,000 views, I think you're outdoing our numbers with our own videos, so that's quite impressive, actually. That's great to see. So, I mean, the purpose of the session today will be to get you acquainted with UFile, show you some of the basic features of the program. We'll do like maybe a few examples of entries as well as I go along. So I'll go right through the presentation, and then we'll have like a Q&A at the end if you want to ask any.
Jerry,
Yeah.
I'm going to butt in.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I forgot to tell the audience there will be a Q&A.
Okay.
I encourage you to type into the Zoom chat any questions that you have or that occur to you as we go through. When Jerry is ready, I'll moderate and I'll work from the top to the bottom of the Zoom chat. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, awesome. All right. So yes, we'll do it that way. I'll just go right through the presentation, and if you have any questions, just list them in the chat, and then I'll be more than glad to go through them and help out. So again, like I said, the purpose will be I'll show the program. I'll just display everything, all the feature, most of the features of the program, and show you the way of entering your tax return using UFile. It's a great, program um, in the sense that I'm just going to share my screen now. Just give me a second here. Okay, so it's a great in that sense. Actually, you know what? Just give me 1 second, everybody. I'm just going to mute everything else on my screen so that we don't get any interruptions. Uh, Sorry, I forgot to do that before starting. And I'll just do that now. Okay, perfect. So again, it's an interview-based approach that's going to help you in producing your return. It's just, it's very user friendly. And it basically essentially the approach of UFile is an interview-based approach, like I just mentioned, which is to ask questions that you simply answer. Now, of course, it does require some input on your end because the program does not know everything that's on your tax return. So it's going to ask the basic questions, but then you have to add the sections that are relevant to your return. And we're going to see that how it does that eventually. Again, it's an easy to use program that's going to help you in producing the returns. And it's one of the most popular programs in Canada right now. So right now you're looking at the program itself. I've got the pro version. None of you will have that version. It'll actually be net file here as a tab instead of e-file, but the interface is exactly the same. Okay, between the products. So UFile in and of itself is split up into 5 screens. Pictured like a 5-step process to completing your return. As you can see, we've numbered each step over here, almost like a step essentially, in order to produce your return. So start is where you start off with a program when you first load UFile. So you can start a new tax file. You carry forward from a previous year. This is a great feature in that you don't have to enter a lot of static information you need to enter from in a file. So your name, your SIN, your address, and some of the carry forward amounts that you might have. The program will do that for you. By carry forward amounts, I mean, of course, like your RSP room and limit, for example, any carry forward losses from previous years, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you've already started the file, you haven't completed it, you want to go back to it, you simply open an existing file right here. Eventually, as you're working on your file, you're going to see a drop-down menu underneath with a list of all the files that you produce for your friends and your family. Okay, so I'm going to start a brand new file. I'm going to assume that all of you are just starting from scratch. I know I've seen a lot of you over the years. It's great to see some of you back to this session. But I'm just going to take the assumption that you're just starting with UFile, and I'm going to start a brand new tax file. Okay, so we just say start a new file. And now we find ourselves in the interview screen, which is the second screen of UFile. Now, like I said, the program is split up into 5 screens, okay, which is like a 5-step process to completing the return. So start is where, again, you either create your file or you continue with your file, or you carry forward your file from the previous year. The interview is where you enter all of the tax information that's on your return. So everything is entered in this one tab, which is the interview. Okay, so unlike other programs that are in the marketplace right now, where they essentially reproduce forms in front of you and you have to fill in the blanks, with UFile, it is a pure interview based approach. Okay, where the program is going to ask you questions and you simply answer them. And by answering every question, you are filling in the fields of the two tax returns that we of course have to produce in Quebec. We're, as you know, as a lot of you are aware, we're the only province on the personal side that has to produce two separate tax returns for two separate tax agencies. Okay, the rest of Canada only deals with the CRA. Okay, for those of you who are watching me right now who are in the rest of Canada, you're only producing one return. While if you're in Quebec, you are producing for two returns. Okay, so again, all of this is entered in this one screen, which we call the interview screen. Now, once you've entered all your tax information, you end up on the third screen, which is the review screen. And the review screen, very simply, what it's going to do is that it's going to give you a bare bones result of the return. It's going to tell you whether you got a refund or a balance owing, and then it's going to give you an abridged summary of the actual return. Just a very bare bones summary of the actual return, plus error messages you might have in your file. So, are you eligible to net file? Did you miss something in your file, et cetera, et cetera? All this will be indicated in your review screen. From there, you go to the tax return screen, and now you can view the official forms that UFile has completed. Okay, so when you end up on the tax return screen, all the relevant forms of your return will be filled in by the software. You're going to see now a list of all those forms. And then finally, once you've checked the return, once you've checked all the forms and everything looks good, then you end up now. In my case, right now, my screen it says e-file. In your cases, it'll say net file. Okay. It'll say net file in this case. All right. So with net file at that point, what's you simply transmit one family member at a time and one jurisdiction at a time. So you have to file. It is two separate transmissions for federal and for Quebec. So you have to do each one. All right. So we've seen the start screen. Let's have a look at the interview screen now and what's within it. Okay, what do we have as far as features? How do I navigate through the interview screen to complete my tax return? Okay, first things first, the interview screen is subdivided into three sections. The first section is this left-hand menu, which we call the navigator. And this left-hand menu will comprise all of the relevant sections that are on your return. Okay, so eventually, as you enter some of the basic questions of the tax return, you're going to end up in a specific section called the interview setup, where you're going to pick and choose the relevant sections of your return. And those sections will appear in this navigator, okay, in this left-hand navigator. And then to complete your return, you just go through each relevant section of the navigator and complete those sections. That's all you need to do, okay, to complete your return. Now, with every section that you choose in the navigator, the program gives you the data entry screen on the right. So when I choose, for example, CRA questions, now I get to the CRA questions that I have to answer on the return. All right, and it's right there. Okay, so I simply go through it and answer, and complete that particular section. And at the bottom of the screen is your diagnostics. So as you're doing the entries of your return in the interview screen, the program is going to flag certain fields that you have to complete or correct. Now, my recommendation to all of you is to not consult the screen until the end. Okay, don't let it bog you down, because as you're entering information, of course you're going to have diagnostics because you're missing certain fields of the return. It's only normal. Okay, so the best thing to do is to complete your return. And once you've completed the return, then look at the diagnostics and see if you've missed something. Because at that point, it's basically your file's complete. So you should only be missing one or two things on the return. Don't look at that screen in the beginning, because of course, when you're starting off with a file, you're missing everything. You're missing your name, you're missing your SIN, you're missing your address, you're missing your family links. Okay. So
I have a
these are
quick
the three
question.
sections of the interview screen. Now let's have a look at how we navigate through. and let's enter some information as we go along. All right, so I will go ahead and start entering information. All right, so again, it's asking me now my identification in this case. Okay, so my SIN number, uh, my date of birth, whatever it is. Okay, and now province of residence. Just be mindful. The province of residence is where you have what the government calls the most significant residential ties. Okay, you might be physically in a province, but you're not necessarily a resident of that province. So, for example, this happens commonly. For example, take for example the oil fields in Alberta. Okay, so you have people who go and go to the oil fields in Alberta on a temporary basis to go work there to make good money over there, but they actually, their permanent home is somewhere else. Okay, so you have to be mindful of that. Now, I don't think we have this kind of scenario in the audience that I have right now, but just be mindful of this. All right. Now, next, and this is where I pull, when I give these sessions to the universities, I pull the what's called I pull the old dad jokes that I pull here, where I tell people that they live in sin, and essentially, when it comes to your marital status, okay, remember that, especially, I mean, right now we're in Quebec. Remember that the civil code is not the income tax act. Okay, so the civil code does not recognize civil unions. Okay, meaning two people who live together in a conjugal relationship. The civil code will usually not recognize it. So when it comes to like splitting assets between two individuals that are in a conjugal relationship that live together, a lot of times the civil code does not recognize that there was a relationship there, and simply divides the assets for who bought them. Okay, but when it comes to the Income Tax Act, whether you're common law, meaning you have a civil relationship with a person, or without a contract, in other words, or whether you're married, meaning you have an official marriage contract with a person, it's one and the same. Okay, to the Income Tax Act. Okay, so the key here is that when it comes to common law or married, now married is simple because it's just a marriage contract. It's not just a ceremony, it's also the fact that you signed over a marriage contract, but you also have common law. And common law meaning that you're living with a person in a conjugal relationship for 12 consecutive months. This is where I crack that joke with university students, because a lot of them do this. They'll live with their boyfriends and girlfriends, and they've been living with them for over 12 months, but they don't declare themselves common law, even though income tax wise they are. Okay. And income tax wise, the Income Tax Act does not make a distinction whether you have a spouse because of a common law relationship, or because you're married, you have a spouse. Quebec doesn't even care about statuses. On the Quebec return, the only question they ask is, do you have a spouse at the end of the year? Yes or no. It's a literal yes or no question on the Quebec tax return. Okay. While on the federal side, they do need a marital status. Okay. So there you go. So you choose whichever it is. In my example, I'll choose married so I can show all of you how we add a spouse, okay, to a family. But just be aware, the other provision to mention when it comes to marital status is, the moment you've changed from single to something else, you don't go back to single. Okay, so for example, if you were single, you got married, or you were in a common law relationship and then you separated, you will remain separated unless you get another spouse. Okay, same thing with widowed. Okay, somebody who is widowed will remain widowed until they get another spouse. Okay, they don't go back to single the year after death. Okay, it does not work that way for the federal government. All right, so that's another thing to mention here. That's very, very important. Did your marital status change in 2025? This is a very important question, because of course, when the change happens in the year, a lot happens after that. Okay, meaning that a lot of credits and other claims will change based on the fact that you have a change in the year. Okay. Now, what matter? What the effect is of having a spouse or not having a spouse is, of course, in the determination of certain deductions and credits. Okay, and benefits as well. So, for example, the grocery rebate can be determined on an individual basis or on a combined basis. That depends whether you are married or not, whether you have a spouse or not, and whether you have a spouse in the year. Okay. And for example, if you separate in the middle of the year, certain credits behave differently in the year when the separation happens, or in the year when the marriage happens, or the common law union happens. Okay. So that's why it's important to mention whether there's a change or not in order for the program to properly compute those things. All right. Now, so don't shoot the messenger. The gender question is mandatory for Quebec. You have to choose male or female. All right. So I'm going to choose male. I'm doing my own return here. And then has the mailing address changed since the last return? That's also an important question for the government to know whether they have to submit the documents to another mailing address. So I'll say no for now. And once I'm done this entry page, again, I'm in the first section of the navigator. I click next. And now the program takes me to the second section of the navigator. So you see, I'm following each individual section of the navigator. I just follow it through. Okay. So spouse interview type, the program now wants to know whether you are going to complete your spouse's file with yours in the software. Now, there's no combined return, unlike the United States. That concept does not exist in Canada. Okay, but you can produce on a combined basis in the software, and it's of course recommended. That's why we have it as an option, recommended. And the reason why we recommend it is because there are certain amounts that in the Income Tax Act are permissible to transfer between spouses. For example, pension income splitting. So I can split up to 50% of my eligible pension income and send it in my spouse's return. Okay. Medical expenses is another that either spouse can claim on behalf of the other. Okay. Donations is another example as well. And these are all what we call optimizations. Okay. In UFile, we call it max back. Okay. Where the program determines these transfer amounts for you. Okay. Now, the only way that it can perform these transfers automatically for you is if you're producing your spouse's file with yours. Okay. It's the only way it can do that. All right. If you're not completing your spouse's return with yours, then you have to do net income only. And then there's basic information that you have to enter of your spouse's file. You need their name, their SIN, their date of birth, and their net income in the year. Okay. And of course, you're not optimizing in that case. You're not optimizing the tax return at that point. So for our example, I'm going to choose complete information and we'll go from there. All right, current address. Let's enter, of course, the mailing address. All right, so I'm entering anything here. I'm going to enter Santa Claus's postal code here, just as an example. Here we go. I always do that with all my presentations, just a heck of a lot easier, and it works. It's actually a valid postal code. And finally, for Quebec, you need a phone number. Okay, there has to be a contact phone number in Quebec. Okay, that's a requirement on the Quebec return. All right, so once I've entered the address, I click next. Now I get to the basic questions on the federal return. So there are some basic entries that I have to do, that I have to answer on the federal return. Okay, so first things first, language of correspondence. Do I want to get my correspondence with the federal government and with Quebec for that matter? You're actually answering both in this case, in English or in French. Okay. Now, are you filing a tax return for the very first time? Usually, this is the case for immigrants. So, somebody who's an immigrant coming into Canada and they're filing for the first time, they would answer yes. Otherwise, you answer no. Okay. The reason why the program asks you this question is because because if you're filing for the first time, you will likely have to paper file the return. You'll have to mail it. Okay, the government will not accept it electronically because it's your first time. All right, next we got, do you own foreign property in 2025 with a total cost of over $100,000 at some point in the year? Okay, so this is an important question. If you own any assets, be it real estate, be it bank accounts, be it foreign shares, and this includes, by the way, foreign shares in Canadian brokerage accounts. So if for example, you have a taxable account, meaning it's not a registered account, so it's not an RSP, it's not a RIF, it's not an FHSA, it's not a TFSA, and the cost of all those shares goes above $100,000 Canadian at some point in the year, then you have to mention it to the government. The government wants you to list those properties to them. Okay, so in my case, I'll just say no. It's usually rare you're gonna have this, but if it is yes, you have to say yes, and you have to complete a specific form, both federally and in Quebec. T1135 on the federal, and I think there's a new form now in Quebec that you have to produce, which is a TP 1079 something or other. Okay. Now I don't think I have any diplomats here, so we'll say no. Elections Canada question, you're essentially indicating first, are you a citizen of Canada? You answer correctly that question, and then you indicate whether you want to authorize the CRA to provide your mailing address to Elections Canada. That way, Elections Canada can find you when federal elections happen. Okay, to tell you where you can vote. Okay, so I would say yes. There's really no reason not to divulge that. So I would say yes. All right. Next, you've got email notifications. Be very mindful of this. You can indicate to the software whether and to the government whether you want to get notified by email when the notice of assessment has been deposited. There's a big catch though to saying yes to this question. And the catch is, which we put in bold here, is that you will no longer get an assessment by mail if you say yes to this question. So if that's okay with you, you don't want a paper one anymore, and you just want to go to My Account, which is the online portal of the CRA, and just download your notice of assessment from there, that's fine. That's up to you. But be mindful, if you're still expecting to get a paper assessment, okay, you won't get one if you say yes to this question and you enter your email. So I'm going to say no for now, okay? And then type of prepare, you guys won't have these questions. This is only for pro users of UFile. You won't have these questions. So I'm just going to skip ahead and I'm going to go next. And now I end up with the same type of questions, but this time for the Quebec return, because as I mentioned, we're the only province in Canada on the personal side that has to produce a separate tax return and send it to a separate tax agency, okay, which is Revenu Québec. Okay, so we go through the same questions or similar questions. So first, is this the first tax year you're filing in on the Quebec tax return? We're going to say no, but just be mindful that for this question, you could have, it's not your first return on the federal, but it might be your first return with Quebec if you've moved to Quebec during the year. So we're going to say no. Are you eligible for the Quebec amount for person living alone? So this, if you're not sure what that means, what person living alone is, what this amount is, just click on the question mark, and then you will see that the program will give you an explanation of what this amount is. So essentially, it's a non-refundable tax credit where if you live in this case with no other adult in the household for 12 consecutive months, meaning the whole calendar year, then you are entitled to this credit. Of course, it's also income based. So if you make too much income, you won't get it. But if you at the very least meet the basic criteria, which is you live alone in your place throughout the calendar year, then you can say yes. And you notice that this question mark is on every single field. So when you doubt something in the software, what you're answering in that question, just click on the question mark. And the program's going to give you a very detailed explanation as to what you're answering. So in this case, I'll say no, of course, because I'm married. I'm living with my spouse. Now there are scenarios where you could have what the government considers as involuntary separations. meaning that, you have one spouse, for example, who lives at home, but the other spouse is in a residence. Example. Okay. These things happen as well. Now, do you wish to request an accelerated refund? This one will depend on you. Okay. If you say yes to this question, the Quebec government will take your word for the results that you submit to them, and then we'll double check your return later on. Okay. So they'll send you the check within a week. They'll send you your refund within a week. Okay. And they'll take your word for it. But then they'll check you later on. And if they check you later on, then chances are it might be after tax season and you might have to pay interest on the amount that you owe. Okay. Because they overpaid you something. If you say no, you're telling the government, take more time to assess my return. Take more time to look at it and then send me my result. Okay. So, I'll say yes for now. This is up to you. Crypto assets. If you received, if you still hold, or you disposed of crypto assets during the year, you have to tell the Quebec government. Okay, the Quebec government, it's a yes or no question. There might be additional questions after that they might ask. For now, I'll say no. Okay. Next, do you wish to apply for the Quebec Solidarity Tax Credit? So this is, of course, the quarterly or monthly benefit that the Quebec government will pay, which is the equivalent of the GST credit on the federal side. Okay, which is now called the grocery rebate. They put a lot of money into the marketing, of renaming it. Okay, but it's essentially the GST credit. All right. So solidarity is the equivalent in Quebec, but with Quebec, you have to answer questions. You have to apply for it. Okay. Federally, you just submit your return, and then the federal government will determine if you're eligible or not. And usually, it's based on your income, on your age, and whether you're a Canadian resident or not. Quebec, though, there's more criteria. Okay, so you have to answer a few questions before they give you the credit. So we'll say yes, and we'll go through those questions together and see what it is. All right, Quebec Tax Shield you can ignore. Unless you're claiming the work premium or you got childcare expenses, it does not affect you. Okay, and it's going to be gone as of 2026 as well to boot. Okay, and then you've got the notification again, just like on the federal. Okay, you could just leave it blank. All right, again, make sure that you're aware that they won't send you, and then you got your online correspondence. Again, the moment you say yes, the government will no longer mail to you the notice of assessment. So be very wary of what you answer here. All right. So from here now we get to the Quebec prescription drug insurance information. And this is a very important question that needs to be answered on the Quebec return. All right. So what this is, simply put, is, when it comes to your prescription drugs, how are you covered? Okay. Is it the government that's covering you? Or are you covered under private insurance, for example, with your employer? Okay. And did that situation change during the year? So that's, very important question because, of course, this insurance is not free. Everybody says, oh, we've got free, healthcare. Not true. Somebody pays. Okay. Nothing in life is free. Okay. So at that point, you have to now indicate to the software what your situation is as far as the Quebec drug insurance. So meaning your prescription drugs. When you go to the pharmacy, chances are you're being reimbursed a portion of the fee of the cost of those prescription drugs. Is it a private insurance with your employer that's reimbursing those fees? Or is it the drug insurance provided by the RAMQ? That's what you're indicating here. And has your coverage changed during the year? For example, did you retire in the year and you're no longer covered under your private insurance plan with your employer and you're now covered with the government? Or the opposite, you were unemployed and then now you found a job and your job is offering you private insurance. Okay. So very important to know to properly assess what your situation is. So the first two options is private insurance all year. It's either yours or your spouse's or parent, etc. Okay, that's what you're choosing here. The third one is you're covered with the RAMQ for the whole year. And then there might be a fee that you'll have to pay, which will be an additional tax on your tax return based on your income and other situations. Okay, now, if your situation changed during the year, okay, for example, exceptions all the year. Now, you could be covered under the RAMQ, but you might not be charged the insurance if you fall under an exception. Okay, one example of this is if you're collecting 94% of the guaranteed income supplement, then usually you're exempted. You're still covered under the RAMQ, but you won't pay for the insurance. Another example is if you're a student between 18 and 20, if you're a full-time student between 18 and 25 during the year, again, you're covered under the RAMQ, but you don't pay for that insurance. Okay, that's what they mean by exception. Okay, because the private insurance, that's your first two options. The fourth option here is another exception. So, for example, if I choose this one, here's the list of exceptions that I have. You see right there. And that's all year. Now, the other option is you fall under an exception, but only part of the year. Okay. And this would include private insurance. Example. Okay. I was working and I lost my job during the year. And since I'm no longer covered under the insurance plan of my employer, I by default fall back to the RAMQ plan. Okay. And I have to indicate the months. So let's take the example. Okay. Let's say I was working until the end of March. And then as of April, I lost my job. And now, and I was unemployed the rest of the year, let's say. Okay. Or I was sick, whatever it was. So I choose exception part of the year. I choose the exception, which in my case would be I was covered under an employer plan, which is a private insurance. And then I choose the months I was covered by that insurance, the private plan in this case. In other words, what are the months in which I have an exception to paying the RAMQ? Now, here's the other thing to mention when it comes to these exceptions, okay, is that when your situation changes in the year, you have to advise RAMQ ahead of time. You must call them. Or if they, I don't know if they have an online portal, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure if they have an online portal. If they do, you will go to their online portal and mention it. I will call them. That's what I would do. Okay, that's what I used to do. Okay, because if you don't advise them ahead of time, two things happen. Number one, on your tax return, they won't believe what you're sending them. They're going to say, well, you didn't advise us that you were covered with us now. Okay, so, we're not going to accept the result of this. The other consequence is when you go to the pharmacy for the first time to collect your prescription, after you've been bumped out of the private insurance plan, well, the RAMQ has no idea that you're no longer covered under the private insurance. They have no idea. And when you go to the pharmacy, you'll have a nasty surprise that they won't cover your prescriptions because you didn't advise them ahead of time. So before filing your tax return, if your situation changed, if you had something like what I have right now on my screen, you have to call them ahead of time before you file in order to, number one, avoid problems with the return, and number two, avoid problems with your pharmacy. Okay? So you have to advise them. All right, and there you go. And that's honestly, I could tell you this as a practitioner of many years and just dealing with clients on the professional side and on the consumer side, this question is the source of the majority of the reassessments of the Quebec return. This is it. Okay, because people are not aware what the situation is. And the government reassesses and you got to go back and fix it. So actually, I'll give you my story where this happened to me. I was claiming the exception at the time when I was a student, 18 to 25, full-time student and unmarried, which was my case. I graduated, and after I graduated, I became sick. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I had to do my surgery, and I had a list yay long of medication that I had to take, which the government fully exempted me for. Okay, they paid all of it. All right. Now I filed my tax return. I no longer have the exemption. So guess what? Guess what they did? Guess what Revenue Quebec did? They reassessed me, saying, "Hey, you're not a student anymore." And not only that, normally where they covered 100% of my prescriptions, they were only supposed to cover 80 or 70%. And they asked me for the difference, lump sum. So not fun, not fun. Make sure that you advise them first of all, and that you are aware what your situation is. All right. So we go next, and now we go to the solidarity tax. Right. Notice I'm just going one by one through the navigator sections. That's what the navigator is about. Okay, you got all the relevant sections of your return, and you just go through one by one. All right. Okay. So now solidarity, like I said, is either monthly or quarterly, depending on how much you're entitled to. Okay, where you get a tax credit, which is really a benefit. Okay, because they're paying you directly in your account, in your bank account, and it's comprised of three components. Number one is the QST component, the QST credit component. Okay, so they're giving you cash for the fact that you're paying QST to buy your goods and services every day. Okay, to alleviate some of it. Okay, the second component is your residential component. So you pay rent, you pay property taxes. The government's going to give you a credit to help you to pay for those things. Okay, and then finally, the third component is the Northern Village, which I don't believe I have anybody in this presentation from a Northern Village. But I just want to mention that it is three components. There is the Northern Village component as well. All right, so now we have to answer questions because you have to apply for solidarity, and we have to answer questions for solidarity. So number one, throughout 2025, was I alone in this dwelling with no other adult? Now, of course, in my case, it's no, because I'm married and my spouse lives with me. Okay, but that's the question. Now, be mindful as well that with a couple, only one of the spouses can claim solidarity for the two. Okay, it's not an individual application. When it's a couple, it's combined, and you have to choose who's going to claim it, who's going to collect the payments. All right. Is the address of your principal residence on December 31st the same as on your return? I'll say yes for now. And do I live in the Northern Village? The answer is no. All right. So that's the QST component. I've answered the questions, at least some of them. I will have to answer some for my spouse as well. Because remember, it's a combined claim. I'm claiming on behalf of my spouse as well. Now, the next one is the residential component. So if you're an owner of a property, you pay property taxes. Or if you lease a property and you're on the lease, officially on the lease, you are now entitled to the residential component. If you're an owner, you need your property taxes. You need your bill. Okay, your bill is gonna have the numéro cadastral, as they call it. That's the number you will need to put in to the application. If you're a tenant, the owner owes you a specific slip called the Relevé 31. Relevé 31. Okay? And that Relevé is going to have a code. And it's a unique code per tenant. Okay? That is given to you. And you simply plug in the code directly into this questionnaire. but you need that code. And the only way you're entitled to a Releve 31 is if your name is on the lease. So if, for example, you live with a roommate or with your spouse or whoever, and your roommate in this case is not officially on the lease, your roommate does not get a Releve 31. Only you get it, and only you are entitled to the residential component of solidarity. Okay? Now, your roommate can still claim solidarity, but your roommate can only claim the QST component, not the residential component. Okay? So your name has to be on the lease. So right here, let's do the example. I'll say I'm a tenant, and again, official tenant in this case. And now I will say the Releve 31 was an issue purely in my name or somebody or my spouse's as well. And then I put in the unique dwelling number that is generated on the Releve 31, which again, the owner of the property that you lease from owes you this slip. If you don't have it, call Revenue Quebec. It's as simple as that. If you have an official lease with somebody, and again, it has to be an official lease, okay? If you have an official lease with somebody and they have not remitted to you a Releve 31, first of all, you contact the owner and ask them for one. And if they still refuse to give you one, you contact Revenue Quebec. All right, now in my case, I don't have a number, I don't have an example of one. So what I'll do is I'll say I'm neither an owner nor a tenant, okay? I'll just skip ahead of this. All right, now with my spouse. Do I have a spouse? Yes. Last year. Did I live with my spouse? In my example, I'll say yes. Okay. And was she in the Northern Village? The answer is no. Now, the reason why the government is asking you if you live with your spouse, this can happen in the scenario what they call an involuntary separation, meaning that you do have a spouse, but your spouse is, for example, in a long-term care facility, but you still live at home. Okay? And there you go. All right. So once all this is done, I click next. And now usually what you guys will get is a net file page. Okay. You simply say yes if eligible and yes if eligible for Quebec. You don't need to do more than that. Okay. Now from here, you also have the option of using Autofill My Return for federal and for Quebec, which means that you can download the official slips that the CRA and Revenue Quebec have in their possession directly into the software. And then the data entry will be performed by the import of these slips. Okay, now it's not complete necessarily because remember, you got donations, medical receipts that would not be part of this. Okay, the only receipts that are part of this would be official slips. So T slips and RSP receipts. That's it. Okay, that's all that is a part of this. Okay, so now the only way you can use autofill, whether it's federal or Quebec, is that you have to be signed up for their online portals. Okay, you have to sign up for their online portals. All right, meaning is My Account CRA and My Account Revenue Quebec. You have to be signed up to to both actually. Okay, and that because when you're going to do autofill, it's going to prompt you to sign in to those accounts. And then you could download the slips directly into the software. I strongly recommend signing up to those accounts. Even if you don't want to do autofill, I still recommend that you sign up to those accounts. It's still worthwhile because all of your tax information is found in one spot. And a lot of times where you would have to call the CRA to get information, you can simply gain access to it by going to My Account. Another example why it's so important to have My Account is because it's the only place you can find out what your TFSA room and limit is. The government does not publish your room and limit, on your notice of assessment. They publish your RSP room and limit, but not your TFSA room and limit. All right. So You've got the one section on the federal, the one section for Quebec. Go ahead and use it. I strongly recommend it. Signing up to either one is pretty easy, okay, because both of them use what's called partner sign-in, which is basically you just log into your online banking, and that'll get you to their portals. So you didn't even have to create a new user ID and passcode. You could use the same user ID and passcode that you use for your online banking, and you could get in. Okay, so I strongly recommend that you use it. Okay, that you sign up for it. All right, now we end up to the most important section in the interview, which is the interview setup. And this is where you have to now provide feedback to the software. Okay, you have to tell now UFile what's in your return. What are the relevant sections of your tax return? Okay, so from here, it's a questionnaire essentially where you're picking and choosing what is relevant to your return. So, for example, do I have employment income? Perfect. I tick the box next to employment income. Sorry. Do I have pension income? That's fine. I'll tick the box next to pension income. Do I have medical expenses? Do I have donations? I make sure to tick those boxes. Okay, and so on. All right, so you pick and choose what is relevant. And then once you've chosen all these relevant sections, the program will add them to your left-hand navigator just below this interview setup. They're going to get added right below. So I click next, and now you'll notice all these sections have been added. There's my pension income. There's my medical. There's my donations. It's all there now. And now I can go ahead and enter the relevant information. Okay, there you go. So now let's do some examples. Okay, so let's do like oh, is there a question?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, I heard something. Okay, so let's do some example entries, and then we'll look at how we add family members to the file. So how do I add my spouse? Okay, how do I add dependents that I might have? Okay, and so on. All right, so I'll start with the T4 and employment income. So I get to the T4, and here it is. And now, once I go to that section, I've got all the possible entries that I could do for the T4. So I'll click on the plus sign next to T4 and Relevate 1, and now I'll start plugging in some information. So let me put my employer here. My case is Thomson Reuters. Okay, and then I've got my provincial. Now be mindful that in Quebec, so you see that the boxes are in columns here. So you're entering federal and Quebec simultaneously. Okay, your best bet to do the entries is you always start with the federal. Usually the entries between federal and Quebec are pretty much identical, with some exceptions. Okay, there's going to be obviously some entries that are going to be different, but the grand majority of them are going to be the same. So you got your federal in one column, you got your Quebec in the other column. Okay, so you start with the federal, you enter your information, you enter Quebec, and then you start entering all the rest of the information. Okay, whatever you see. So you see, just follow the box numbers. That's all. Okay, just follow the box numbers and enter the relevant information. So let's say now my withholdings as source on the federal would be, let's say 6,000. For Quebec, it would be, let's say 7,000, and so on. Okay, and you just plug in your amounts. All right. Once you're done, you click next and you go to the next one and you go to the next section. Now, you don't have to follow the order that you see here. And not all sections are necessarily relevant. Some of them are generated by default. by UFile, but they're really relevant for you. Like maybe you don't have any other income or some other information slips. Just leave them blank. You don't have to do them. Just skip ahead of them. Okay. Just choose the sections that are relevant and just go ahead and do your entries. So you see here for pension income, you've got all the pension income slips here. T4A, T4A OAS, T4AP, T4 RIF, T4 RSP. It's all there. So let's say, let's enter let me do an example here. Let's say T4 RSP. I withdrew from my RSP account, and there you go. Okay, so I just simply follow the box numbers, and you see Quebec, there's nothing to enter really because they're the same. Okay, essentially the box numbers are the same. All right, now some other examples of entries. Okay, let's have a look at medical and disability. Okay, so medical expenses, I'm sure all of you have this. You enter your eligible medical expenses in that relevant section, which is right here. I click on the plus sign, and then I enter the date of the expense. Okay, I enter where the expense was done, and then I enter the amount. Now, if I need another entry, you see there's a plus sign right here on the right. Just click on it, and then an additional entry will be added, and I can start entering the other entries. All right, and there you go. And you just enter your medical. Now, if you're entitled to disability, and that means you would be entitled to disability tax credit, then in that same medical section, you've got an option which is infirmity and disability amounts claimed for yourself. You click on it, you put a description of the disability, whatever that is, and then you indicate if you are eligible for the disability amount. And to be eligible for the disability amount, you must have submitted certificates to the federal and to the Quebec governments, certified by a medical practitioner, indicating that you have, as per the Income Tax Act, a disability. And for the Income Tax Act, what constitutes disability is that you have a condition that profoundly affects your day-to-day life and activities. Okay? If you're not sure as to whether you are eligible for this or not, just go to your doctor and find out. Okay? Doctors are used to this form. They complete these forms all the time. Okay? They should be aware, they should know whether you are entitled to disability amount or not. And if they are, they have to sign off on the form. In that form, there's one for federal and one for Quebec, has to be submitted to the CRA and to Revenue Quebec ahead of time. They have to certify, they have to accept it. Okay, so you say claim disability amount, and then you would do the same thing for Quebec. All right, and there you go. Okay, and now you've gotten your disability. All right, so from here, donations, right here, Canadian charitable donations, right here, you simply enter, in this case, you enter, the amount that you donated to the organization that you donated to. Okay, and that's
Atwater
it.
Library.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, thank you for stepping in there, Lynn. It didn't even cross my mind. I don't know where I'm at right now, but there you go. Atwater Library. There it is. Okay, which is a recognized charity. It has to be. Remember that whoever you're donating to has to be a recognized charitable organization, which means they have to be registered with the federal government. Okay, so it's not just anybody that could be considered a charity. Okay, so they have to be recognized. All right, and usually when you get the receipt, they'll have the registration number as a charity on the receipt. That's how you'll know. Okay, that essentially they are eligible. All right. And from there, I think I'm basically done. Okay, as far as the main person. And then the first person that created, which is myself, is what we call the family head in UFile. Okay, so that's the first file that I create. Now what I'll do is that I'll create my spouse. Okay, I'll create my spouse and start entering her information. All right, so I go right next to my name. You'll see it has an add spouse and has an add dependent. So you see all the family members will be added as tabs just underneath the five main tabs. So I go here and I will say add spouse right next to the family head's name. In this case, it's me. All right, so now I start entering my wife's information. So I basically do the same thing as what I just did for my file. I enter her information now, okay, and complete her return, just like I did with mine. All right, that's all I'm doing. So right now, I'm actually using my wife's name. She always gets annoyed whenever I do this, but doesn't matter. It's fun. So I go in here, I enter right there. Okay, province of residence. Again, it'll be the same province as me. Gender is a mandatory question in Quebec. And you have the same address as your spouse. We'll say yes. So I don't have to re-enter the address for the spouse. And has the mailing address changed? We'll say no. So now again, you'll notice I'm getting the same questions exactly. And look, it's the same navigator. But now I'm under my wife's name, my wife's file instead of mine. So you see that the tab right now is on my wife instead of me. Okay, so you see it right there. All right. So I'll just quickly answer these same questions as I did before. Okay, just to get through it. And actually, I'm not going to enter any other entries in my wife. Okay, I'm just going to say she has zero income just for the sake of getting through the presentation. Okay. So, whoops, I'm going to say no here. Same questions for Quebec. No. Accelerated refund. No. Does she have crypto assets? No. Solidarity tax. Remember what I said. Only one of the couple can claim it on behalf of the two. So since I put it in my file, I'm going to say no in my spouse's file. Okay, because in this case, only one person can claim it. Okay, and so on. So right here, drug insurance, I'll say she's covered under my plan all year, just for brevity. And now I'm just going to go straight to the interview setup. I'm just going to say that she has no income. Okay, I just want to get through it. I'm not going to start entering other data for her. That's not the point. The point is to show you how I added her file to mine and how I linked the two files together. All right, and that's what I've done. Okay, so now let's say in my scenario, we have a child, and again, I've got two children, and I've got one of them who's in daycare. Okay, so I can claim those daycare fees as an expense on my return. On the federal side, it's a deduction off of my net income. In Quebec, it's a refundable tax credit that I can claim for the childcare expenses. Okay, so what I'll do now I have to enter those expenses. How do I do that? I do that by creating a file for my dependent. So for my 3-year-old, I'm going to create a file. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I will create a file for my dependent, even though I'm not filing a tax return for him, I still create a file. And the expense that I incurred for my child, I enter in my child's file. And the program will simply plug those amounts over to either myself or my wife. Okay, so in this case, let's enter the information. I'm actually going to enter the real name. Right there, my little 3-year-old, little troublemaker, no SIN number. And let's enter a date of birth here. He's 3 years old in 2025. So right here, it's Quebec. Marital status is going to be single. Did the mailing address change? We're going to say no. Did the dependent have any income? Of course, me, it's a 3-year-old, so it's going to be no. And does he require return? Just let Max back decide. If you have teenagers that have some employment income, you just plug it in just to claim amounts. Just let the program determine it for you. Okay, it'll decide whether your child needs a tax return or not. Now, the dependent also has an interview setup, just like what we had in my file and my wife's file. The difference, though, is going to be that number one, in the interviews, be less options to choose from. So I won't be able to produce the same types of returns as I can for my family head or the spouse. Okay. And secondly, some of the sections that will appear here will depend on what I entered in their identification. So because I entered that my child is 3 years old, the moment I go next, the program's going to figure it out and say, well, you know what? If that child's 3, it's very likely that they have childcare expenses. Very, very likely. So when I click next, you'll notice right there, my childcare expenses will be right there. So now I go to childcare, and right here, I've got my childcare expenses, my daycare right there. I click on the plus sign, and then I enter whatever those fees are, which are quite high, and so on. Now, mind you, there are possibilities where your box C will have nothing in it, okay, or it'll be zero. Because if the child is in a subsidized daycare by the government, or the famous $10 a day daycares, the government will not permit you to claim the tax credit. Okay. And there's a very simple reason for that. It's because they're giving it to you at such a cheap price. They're not going to allow you to double dip and claim a credit at the same time. Now, the thing though, is that just because Quebec's not allowing it doesn't mean the federal won't. You're still entitled to get the deduction for childcare expenses for the $10 a day that you paid over the year, over the whole year. Okay. So federally, you're claiming the full amount, but Quebec, it might be zero. So, and you might have to just enter zero there, enter the identifiers of the daycare, and you're good to go. Okay, so right now, theoretically, I'm done. I'm done with the return. Okay, I've entered my information, I've entered my spouse's information, I've entered the childcare expenses of my son. So now I'm done, and I'm ready to produce the tax return. So again, I could change between the family members by simply clicking on their names right there. And now I'm ready to click on the review tab to see a bare bones result of the tax return. Okay, so now I click on review, and there we go. The program now produces the results of the tax return for all my family members. Man, I am good. 7,900. Whew, I can't spend it all at once. There you go. I am really good. Of course, the government's going to reassess me real quick. But anyways, so I've got a bare bones result of my return. Now, from here in the review tab, you also have a navigator. And you can go and look at what we call the messages. And the messages will tell you what you're missing in the file. First of all, to be able to electronically file. And in Quebec, I'm missing for the childcare the identifier for the childcare expenses. Okay, every daycare has an ID number given by Revenue Quebec, and I don't have that number right now. I didn't enter it, so I can't transmit the return unless I get that identifier. Okay, and then from there, I also get some other messages, like for example, the max back optimizations. In this case, the program's telling me, you know what? I've given all medical expenses to my wife, or I've given donations to myself, so on and so forth. All these transfers, the program performs automatically. It tells you offhand, right here in the max back optimizations. Okay, then you get a bare bones result of the return itself. There you go. Quebec, the same thing, bare bones result. And then you also get tax savings ideas where the program can suggest to you other things that you could do possibly to improve the result of your return. They might not be relevant, but it's just ideas that it's going to give you. Now, once I've checked now this review tab, I'm ready for the fourth, which is the tax return tab. And this now what the program will do is that it'll take, again, all the results and it'll produce now the official government forms filled in by the answers I provided in the interview. So you see right here, everything's filled in. See, there's my employment income, there's my pension income, so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the official federal forms. Anything you see with a maple leaf next to it is official federal form. Just give me 1 second. I think I'm about to sneeze. All
Bless
right.
you.
So sorry about that. Thank you. And anything with a fleur de lis is the official Quebec form, Quebec forms. Okay, again, filled in based on what you inputted in the interview. Okay, based on what you inputted directly in the interview. All right, so there you go. Now, any other page that you see there that doesn't have a maple leaf or fleur de lis is basically an in-house form where we give you additional information on the return. So, for example, here you got a bare bones summary of the return itself. And here you got another handy one here, which is a Quebec, a federal and Quebec simultaneous comparative results of the return. Now from here, you can print or you can save as a PDF. I strongly recommend you save it as a PDF. Strongly recommend this. Okay, because if and then archive it somewhere safe. Because if, for example, you can no longer load UFile for some reason, you at least have the PDF as a last resort to see what the result of the return was that you submitted to both governments. Okay, PDF is universal. There's a million programs you could choose from to load your PDF, including browsers. Okay, and so on. All right. And then you've got, in my case, it says eFile. In your cases, it will be NetFile. And once you click on the fifth tab, you're basically ready to go. You're ready to transmit. You simply now go right here to the submission page, and then you just click File Your Return. Then it's going to take you to Quebec. You file it again. And then at the end, you end up with the acknowledgement report, which gives you the confirmation numbers. So if you're not sure whether you transmitted the returns or not, you see it right there. If there's confirmation numbers, you've transmitted. You no longer need to do it again. All right, so there you go. And I think that's it. I think that about covers the navigation of the program.